Thank you so much for listening again to the Erik Heine Academy podcast. Today I have a conversation with Pete Blair, and in his bio, I found that he is the executive director of the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training, ALERRT Center, and a professor of criminal justice at Texas State University. Is that correct, Pete?
That's correct. Thanks for
That's
having me
correct.
on.
Yeah, thank you. And you have a beautiful I'm not sure if you can call it a blog. It's on Substack anyway. It's called Tactical Science, and it's a great resource for all police and military trainers. I think a lot of applied research, and the reason I wanted to talk with you is because of the your your enthusiasm for the CLA approach and constraint-led approach. And the questions I have for this podcast is what is the ecological dynamics? Why is it a good approach to police training? What are fundamentals and how important are they? And I hope we can talk a little bit about debriefing and reflection in police training and how they fit or do not fit with the CLA design. So that are my questions. And to be sure, because when you do a podcast, I always get framed in one camp or another. I like the conversation, and
Yeah,
I've also talked with people who are not so enthusiastic about, like Dave Collins or maybe Chris Cusion, whoever like questions, but also talk with people who are very enthusiastic about it. But for me, the conversation is important, and like
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So I certainly am a fan of the ecological dynamics approach and the CLA. I think they're useful training tools. One of the things that I've been working with lately is what I see in the different camps that are out there. As you said, there are people who are critical of it and say, well, there's not as much research as you would like to see in order to lean into the principles more heavily. Um, One of the things that I ran into in trying to look at those criticisms seriously and address them is to kind of take a step back from all of it and say that one of the things that seems to be really uncontroversial is the idea that experiential learning should be the core of what you're doing in order to learn. And then what you see beyond that is there are people who have arguments about exactly what the mechanisms are that
Mhm.
drive that and how they produce good learning. So to me, any theory is only as good as it is useful.
Yeah,
So to the extent that it makes good suggestions about ways to conduct training that might help do things, I think that's very useful.
yeah,
To the extent that you find it narrowing yourself in to where I can't do this thing because this theory says that, but when I've done it, it seems to have worked for me in the past. I don't like that kind of approach.
no,
So I've
true.
been kind of talking about, and I haven't posted anything on my blog yet, but I've given some talks related to this idea that if you look at the philosophical and cognitive science literature, there's a guy named John Vervaeke who has the four
Yeah,
P's of knowing.
great.
And I really like that four P's framework because basically what I can then argue is not that propositional knowledge or facts aren't important, but that participatory knowledge is the ground of everything that you're doing, and that we really, 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 really need to be trying to tap that participatory knowing. And I think CLA, ecological dynamics, is one way of doing that. So that's kind of
Yeah,
the
that's
attaching.
great. So, for this conversation, I would very much like to make it very concrete, and that's purely self-interest because I'm going to give a
Sure.
talk. And here in the Netherlands, we have a model in police training which is not as black as white as it seems, but it was built for beginning instructors. But
Sure.
but how can we introduce the CLA? And I will share my screen. You can see it, hopefully.
Okay.
Um, can you see it now?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, so this is the basic model developed here in the Netherlands, where you have when you
Perfect.
develop programs, you work from right to left. So you have the how do you call it, the street, what kind of scenarios do they make, then in role playing, and then you have knowledge and skills. And for beginning instructors, and if there is no knowledge or skill at all, they work from left to right. But the problem is that sometimes instructors get stuck in the knowledge and skills and the role play. So
Yeah.
my question is now very specific. that suppose you're training a beginning police student who has to learn how to physically arrest a suspect, say.
Sure.
So in the traditional model, some people do that by telling when can you arrest someone, what are some basic skills like controlling the arms and so on and so on. And then we do it in a little bit more context and role playing. And then the end of the day, we have a scenario. That's the black and white. This is not, there are people who do it for far more better, but this is black and white. So my question to you is if we have a beginning student, police student,
Sure.
learning to arrest and control, how can we do that from a constraint led approach perspective? And how, yeah,
Sure. So, what you're displaying here for you all is very similar to what we do in the United States, in that we start with classroom time. You're going to learn a bunch of facts about, and I like to use firearms training as an example because I think it's the area that we have probably the most data on. And so if you look at firearms training in the United States, when firearms training starts, you begin with a classroom session where you go over the parts of the firearm, the fundamental safety rules. You might talk about the law of when you can legally use the firearm or not use the firearm. After you've done that, then you go out onto the range. So I'm going to call the classroom time uh, propositional knowledge.
yeah,
Okay, so it's facts about things. Okay, the firearm works this way. This is what this is called, those sorts of things. And then the next step is you go out on the firearms range and you start practicing using the firearm on the firearms range. So that's called the procedural uh, form of knowing. So you're learning how to do something. So
yeah,
how to shoot the firearm. And so that is where a lot of our training in the United States is focused. And then, like you said, much later in the training, you get into, you call it role playing or scenario-based training, depending on how you define those things. And it comes in there later. And the idea is that we have to give them the ground understanding of propositional knowledge, and then you put some procedural knowledge on that. And then as you go into the role playing, that's trying to get it perspectival, that you understand what it's like to have to use this skill in a particular situation. And then there's a little bit of participatory that always comes along, but usually isn't thought about. And that participatory knowledge is the idea of knowing by being. So it's that your total experience of what you're doing. For example, in the academy, a student is getting the participatory knowing of what it's like to be a student in the academy, learning the things that you are, transitioning from being a civilian to being a police officer, those sorts of things that are going on. And that usually comes, like you showed in the diagram,
yeah,
at the end.
yeah.
And when you look at what the philosophers and the cognitive scientists are now saying about knowing, that's exactly backward.
Hmm.
Uh, and so we've got it backward, and we're trying to go from this little thing up as opposed to the big thing down. So that's a conceptual framework. And I've got a paper I can send you, and I probably need to write something up for it on my blog, but it's a little bit dense and technical, but it's worth having there. And the example that you can use that everybody has experience with, and I understand that Netherlands is big on bike riding, so they'll all know this. But when you learned how to ride a bicycle, you didn't learn by your parents sitting you down in the house and getting out the chalkboard or the whiteboard and drawing, here are the parts of the bike and here are the rules of the road and that. They put you on a bicycle that was modified so that you could handle it. Training wheels or balance bikes are popular now in the US, and it's kind of go have at it. And from that participation in bike riding, you develop a perspective that you knew what it was like to ride a bike. And that perspective shaped your procedures about how you actually rode the bike, how you actually balance on two wheels when you're in motion, how you pedal, how you steer, all those sorts of things. And then the words, the propositions came at the tail end where you had those words so you could communicate with each other about bike riding,
Yeah,
right?
great example. Yeah,
And so it's when we do training now, we tend to do it backward. And so the question you have is you've got a brand new student in the academy. How do you take that student and put them into some situation that's going to reflect police work in some way, shape, or form? And the answer to that is that you're going to have some sort of scenario. the question is, what scenario do you start with, and then how much do you constrain it down to where they can handle it?
Yeah.
So one of the guys that I've been talking with and working with some is at a large state police agency, and state police in the United States do a lot of traffic enforcement. And so what he starts with is traffic stops on day one. So you're putting him in a traffic stop situation and you're asking him to go through and conduct the traffic stop. And then it's constrained about how they behave. And the instructor is nudging them along to certain things. And after they get kind of a basic framework for this is how a traffic stop works, then they start introducing variations to driver behavior. So the driver starts out compliant, we'll say,
Hmm.
and then later they become less compliant and
Yeah.
then even assaultive as you go through the different scenarios. So that's the idea, is that you take something that's grounded in that real experience that's going to be a primary part of their job, and then you constrain it, make it small enough that they can handle it. It's not going to overwhelm them. And as they get more competence, more comfort, you start to back those constraints off and introduce more and more things and give them lots and lots of variation in how they are approaching that situation.
Yes, and I have to mention that the two founders of this model in the Netherlands, uh, they were introduced to police training, and what they saw was the following. They saw police officers putting into scenarios or simulations without having basic knowledge, basic skills. So there was a high failure rate, so to speak. That
Yeah.
was so. But their solution was going back to the skills. But you could also argue, and this is a question for you, that the scenario was too overwhelming.
So that's the first thing, is that the scenario may not have been constrained enough, but it's
Yeah.
also the idea of what does good training look like? And so we tend to have this picture that good training looks like everything is very orderly, everybody's doing the right thing almost all the time, and
Mm.
they're doing that. But actual learning should look somewhat messy. There should be mistakes because that's where they're learning. It means they're testing something.
Yeah.
There should be this kind of sloppiness. There's no better term to refer to it. And so sometimes that's it. And it's not saying that this knowledge and that these propositions don't have value. They do. It's that they really need to be situated within the experience to have the value that you want them to have.
Yeah. How about because the first question I get always, the first question when I do this kind of training is always like, for example, with firearms, especially with firearms, of course, you cannot put them into a minor scenario because of safety concerns. So they have
It,
to yeah, all the all the safety things that you have to tell them, you have to isolate it, you have to do this and do that. Is that still
so
true, or how does it change?
Well, so when you're using firearms, you're definitely dealing with a safety issue, right? You cannot have mistakes made with live firearms that result in people being injured and killed during training. That's just not acceptable, period. So there's definitely a safety concern you have to have. The question is, how do you get past that safety concern? In the United States, I've kind of adopted an approach where I think we're going to do a very short block on traditional firearms training and safety and take you out on the range and have you fire a set number of rounds. We have certain qualifications that police officers are required to shoot. They're on a flat range with set courses of fire. They have to shoot so many rounds at a target within so much time. And what we do is we try to do that first, get it out of the way, and we'll teach that oftentimes in a very traditional kind of approach, so that you can say, we've done that. We've shown that you can operate the firearm safely on a range and you can do that. Then what we do is we use a lot of non-firearms training tools. So simunitions is one of the common ones. Airsoft is one I've seen people use. There are other technologies that are out there with lasers and things like that. So those are there. And the thing that those allow is if you make a firearms mistake with those other training tools, it's not deadly to the person. But you can detect that the mistake happened,
Yeah.
right? And so it allows them to be in that situation. And the example that I use, and it's maybe a little unfair, but If you look at shootings in New York City, it is not uncommon when police officers shoot somebody in New York City that they hit more civilians than they hit bad guys that they're trying to shoot because of the environment that they're oftentimes dealing with. Lots of people around and those sorts of things. And then everybody says, well, why are they doing that? We told them the fundamental firearm safety rules and they trained on a range and they passed a qual. Why are they doing this? Well, the answer is you gave them the safety rules, but you never put them in a situation where they had to negotiate those rules where they could violate them. Because when we're on the range master is watching you, the instructors are watching you. You cannot violate those rules. We will stop everything immediately and it's over with. But when you're on the street, now you have to apply those rules in real time, live. And what you see is people aren't good at doing that because they don't have experience in doing that. You can't do that in training with live firearms because people could be injured and killed, and that you just cannot have that. But you certainly can do it with the other things that are simulations of firearms. And then when
Yeah.
you have that situation where somebody does make a mistake and shoots a partner or shoots a civilian or that sort of thing, that becomes a learning moment then that you can work on. And you can do scenarios where there are people in your foreground between you and the bad guy, or people in the background, or you have an officer appear from nowhere and do things that, are unsafe, you have to adapt to and adjust to. So you can put them in those situations. Does that get at
Yeah,
what you're getting at?
yes, yeah, yes, absolutely. But now we're talking about firearms. Do you have any suggestion for the most effective combination of live fire and the other kind of
So we haven't done any solid research on that. I definitely think that you have to go back to live fire at some point. You can't just do the one initial training and say you passed. You're going to go back and revisit that. There are some things up on my blog with suggestions about how to use the RPAT that Rob Gray likes, that representational practice assessment tool, and how to improve the representativeness of what you're doing in firearms. So trying not to have fixed courses of fire, trying to have things where the targets actually look like people that you would shoot, meaning that they're armed,
yeah,
as opposed to just an empty target. So they're learning a cue on the fact that they're armed. Those sorts of things that you try to do to bring that firearms training closer. Also, if you have access to a shoot house, I think that's worthwhile to go in and work in the shoot house where you're doing live fire on targets while you're maneuvering in an environment and having to maintain the firearm safety rules. That's valuable as well. So firearms is a tough one because you are dealing with the safety and the
yeah,
danger aspect, and and there's no tolerance for error with the
no,
live firearm. It just right, you can't have a mistake with that, and so you do have to be cautious about how you approach it, and that does limit or constrain what you're able to do. It would be really nice if somebody developed a training firearm that had a recoil that was pretty close to what a live firearm is, because I think that's the main thing that's lacking. They
yeah,
shoot projectiles, you get an idea about your barrel being aligned, but I've never seen one of them that has a recoil that's anywhere close to what a live firearm's recoil is. So you're not learning how to control that recoil and come back on target, which is why I think the live fire is still needed and still valuable
yeah.
in that situation. So that's kind of my thing is you're going to intermix it and you're going to do the best you can. And because you're dealing with firearms, that safety aspect is paramount and you absolutely have to respect it.
In my experience, when I was a firearms instructor, I found a big gap between what we did on the range and what we did with simulation and so on. Like when we were in the wild, so to speak, with people shooting at you with sim, moving and so on, people trapped, felt, like all kind of things. They moved and behaved in totally different ways than on the range. So my conclusion was that for how do you call it? Jeff Quayle called it gun sparring, but for
Yeah,
for 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 gunfighting, you need also the total OODA loop.
yeah, well, that's one of the arguments for ecological dynamics is that perception action loop is
Yeah,
so tightly coupled. That's why I had that one post where I call it a PAL now.
yeah,
So you cannot separate the two because if we have different perceptual cues in training than perceptual cues in the field, people will do different actions in the field.
Yeah.
And so we want to get those cues, at least the core part of them, as close to those real life cues as possible, so that the behaviors we see produced on the range are similar to what we see in the field,
Yeah.
as opposed to saying that the field should look like the range. I think the range should look like the field more, again, with safety constraints.
Can we go back to basic constant-led approach for beginners, so to speak? So for
Sure.
beginning, let's say Dutch instructors, can you lay down the fundamentals, the fundamentals of CLA and do it in, for example, concretize it with make it concrete with arrest and control, for example, or you have
Sure,
other example? Yeah.
sure. We can start there. So the CLA has four parts to it, right? So the first part is that you set the intention, right? So the person who's learning should know very clearly what the goal is, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish or to achieve. Okay. The second aspect is that you have to have we constrain it to afford, and that's about getting the activity that we're doing down to the right size so that it affords, meaning they can pick up on what their opportunities for action are. So we're going to make it small enough that it doesn't overwhelm them. Rob Gray uses that 70% kind of mark, about should be about 7 out of 10 times are successful, 2 out of 3, that kind of ballpark is a good challenge point for them. And then you want to have representative design, which means that the task has the core elements of what you're asking them to do in the field, in the performance environment. So in general, and this isn't a written in stone, but the more your practice looks like what happens in real life, probably the more representative you are. It doesn't have to look exactly like that. It doesn't have to have everything, but you have to identify what are those key elements that you think are necessary in order to be in real life. And then the last thing is repetition without repetition, which is we want them to repeat an outcome. We're not so worried about the particular physical activity they did to reach the outcome. So we're not worried about an ideal technique and repping that ideal technique a bunch of times. What we're worried about is that they can solve that problem and get to it. And we'll actually vary what we do during the tasks so that you see variation and there's not just one technique that they use all the time. You're going to see things that emerge through the process of this training because they are more efficient solutions. And certainly trainers can nudge people toward those or even point them out directly to somebody if somebody's having difficulty getting to that point. But that's the framework. Now, when you deal with subject control, the question is where do you want to start that process to make it simple? And a lot of the instructors that I've talked to now say they're now dealing with a generation of kids who have zero physical activity when growing up, very little, uh, particularly very little confrontational where you're opposing somebody and fighting somebody. And so I think it's oftentimes helpful to start at a very basic task. And so in the United States, we refer to somebody as a passive resistor when they're not cooperating with you, but they're not actively fighting you. They're not actively trying to get away. They're just, I'm not going to go along with what you're doing, right? And so that passive resistance is oftentimes a good place to start. And if we're trying to teach people how to move their body around other bodies and do that, I oftentimes think it's useful to start with the person laying down with their hands by their side, just refusing to be handcuffed, for
Mm.
example. And the definition that I would use for police grappling, that's another thing, and we can come back to it in a second. But when you think about this, what is the overall, how would I describe police grappling overall, which is it is the task of immobilizing somebody as it leads to handcuffing. So that becomes that. And that's borrowed off of Greg Sauter's definition of jujitsu, but modifying it toward policing. So that's the focus is whenever we're doing our hands-on stuff, we're steering toward getting somebody handcuffed. So in this case, you've got somebody who's prone, laying on the ground. You can say the situation is they're a protester or something like that. They have their hands, you just instruct the person on the ground to have their hands rigid by their side. And you tell the person who is the police officer to get their hands behind their back and then depending on your department's policies in that, a lot of policies in the United States now don't like to see anybody higher on the back. They like to see them low on the back, really on the butt. So you show, I want you to get to this position where I'm sitting on your butt, and I've got the person's hands behind their back, and then we can handcuff, right?
Yeah.
And we can do that at that point. So that's a starting task. And then once the people, and you'll see people who don't grapple, this is really awkward for them. They're trying to figure out, and you can point out things like, hey, you ever heard of leverage? Is it easier to move something at the end of the lever or at the base of the lever? Oh, why are you messing with the arm there? Maybe it's better up here at the wrist. So you're giving them some pointers and some tips, but I'm not saying this is the way, you know. And I can even show them myself doing it, once or twice, although you want to be careful about that because students will tend to copy exactly what you did and think that's the way. So you want to allow them to explore and nudge a little bit. But after they get that idea of, okay, I can get that person who's holding the hands down by their side and doing that, and I can get the hands behind their back, then you change the task and say, now I want the bad guy or the suspect to bring their arms underneath themselves. So now they're not cooperating, but the hands are hidden underneath. Now you've got to start figuring out how to pry those hands out in order to get them behind the back. And then as they get better at that, you start talking about now we'll have the subject start trying to get up to build base up. So they'll start trying to get to all fours, not stand all the way up, but just get up to all fours. And so we're adding resistance as we're going, but the whole time they're really trying. That person who's on the bottom is really trying not to let you get their hands behind their back. They don't want it to happen. That's their win condition. And the person on top is really trying to make that happen so that you're doing it. But it's a constrained environment. We're not having to worry about all the moving around and takedown and all the rest of it. We're starting there. And then as they get more proficient, we back things up and we open things up more. And what you're going to find is when the people start building up to all fours, and then when you start adding, now I want you to try to get up all the way to your feet, they're learning takedowns because they're actually wrestling mat returns that people start using in order to bring the person back down to the ground. So we're teaching them wrestling backwards,
Yeah.
really. So that's the idea of how you might apply that to empty hand control for a police officer.
So you give them a task. Both have a task, the suspect and the
Correct.
officer, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the big things that people have been talking about for a while, and I agree with strongly, is this concept of liveliness.
Hmm.
And that means that whatever task I give you, you both have a task and you're trying to beat each other
Yeah.
because that produces behavior that's closer to what you see in real life. If it's just, hey, we're going through a set of steps and you're just supposed to comply and go along with the steps. I see this in jujitsu class all the time. Here we're going to teach a technique. The technique has 6, 7, 8, 10 steps, however many steps it has. And you practice that with your partner and you drill it. Maybe they add a little bit of resistance as you get it figured out. And then you go and you do rolling or sparring at the end of class, and nobody does the technique that you did in class that day because nobody has it well enough to be able to do it at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the idea here is not that we're going to give you a technique, but we're going to give you a situation with a clear goal, and your partner has a goal that fights your goal. And so now we have that head-to-head competition that's going on there, which is producing strong effort and making you understand this is what it feels like on the street when somebody's really not trying to cooperate with you.
Yeah. So you don't give them a solution, you give them a desired outcome and
Correct.
a task, and they have to figure out.
Yeah, and you
What,
nudge them. You
yeah.
nudge them ways, right?
Yeah.
When you see that this person's really struggling, they don't seem to have any ideas, you can make suggestions. What if you tried this?
Yeah.
What if you tried that? Sometimes you even change the game a little bit to say, okay, we're going to force it this way in order to help you see what's happening here.
Yeah. So we're three elements, is it three elements, isn't it? We have the person, the task, and the environment. So you can change the task and so on. You can change the environment, of course. The person part, what is that?
So when you're trying to manipulate constraints on the person, the easiest one for trainers usually to access is fatigue.
Yeah.
So if I make you tired first, make you run around, do something, and then you come do the task and you're tired, that's the easiest thing to manipulate. But if you think about it from a recruit in the academy, point of view is that you're oftentimes looking during the academy to enhance their physical fitness over the course of that. And so that's also a example of changing the action capacity of the person.
Yeah.
If they come into the academy, they get stronger, they have better endurance, they do those things. That's also changing those constraints on the person over time in the academy.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Um, Another question, I will share it also with you, is about rethinking fundamentals. I hope my English was good.
Yeah.
So you make a case that what we call fundamentals, for example, in firearms training, but in general, I think that what we call fundamentals might be completely backwards. That drilling isolated techniques doesn't transfer well to real situations. And yeah, that's of course that's a part of our how to call it sports science heritage, that we have the fundamentals first, and so on. And can you explain what do you mean by this, and is there any study about this?
Yeah,
And then the
sure.
following up question is, if fundamentals, whatever we think about it, can also improve through well through game-based approaches.
Yeah. So I think if you look at what people usually refer to as the fundamentals now, and if you think about football, they'll talk
Yeah,
about fundamentals are passing, dribbling, shooting, those sorts of things. In firearms, the fundamentals will be things like the grip on your firearm, your stance, sight alignment, those sorts of things. Uh, Oftentimes, we start by trying to give you those fundamentals and then try to force you into using those fundamentals in whatever task it is that we're giving you. So we give you the fundamental first, and then we give you a task to make, and then we correct you about not doing the correct fundamental in the task,
yeah,
right? And if you think about where those fundamentals came from, I'm not arguing that fundamentals aren't a real thing, that there aren't certain behaviors that you see emerge which are better or more efficient. Okay. I think that's true. I think what's happened is we've gone from where those originally came from. And again, we're trying to go backward about how we approach it. So the fundamentals originally started with people playing whatever game it is, doing whatever task it is, and they found certain things were more efficient.
yeah,
And so because those are more efficient, you do them more often. In ecological dynamics, you'd say these are attractors, right? In dynamical systems, these are attractors, efficient solutions for whatever it is you're trying to do. And as you explore that movement space, you naturally tend to find those over time. And so they found these things that worked and they said, okay, here's what works for me. Now I'm going to turn around and give it to a novice person and try to accelerate their learning by saying, if I can give you these things that work, it's there. And there are all kinds of problems with trying to translate those down to actual performance. So one of the big ones is, and there's a whole line of sports literature on this, where you ask high-level athletes, how do you do what you do? And they will go through and explain in great detail, and they'll demonstrate physically what they do in great detail. And then the researchers go and they actually look at game footage and see, and that is not what the person's doing. And it's not because that person is trying to lie or mislead. It's because procedural knowing, again, is different than propositional knowing. The words knowing is different than the doing knowing. And it has a different memory system called procedural memory. And that's not very accessible to us for pulling out and developing propositions or words or even replaying isolatedly. So it's very difficult for them to do that. So we see that what they explain or what they think and they say they're doing is not actually what they're doing in the game performance. So that's the first problem with that approach, is that it's not clear that we can pull those things out. Now with the biomechanical stuff we can do now, you can actually see these are more efficient solutions for things, and you can measure all these sorts of things, and you could try to find those and do it. But the issue is that if you look at the human body is designed to be lazy. It wants to use as little energy as possible to achieve whatever outcome it is. And if I put you in a task environment that doesn't require the efficient solution that works in the field, you are not going to do it because it's not efficient. It doesn't make sense. And the examples that I've used on my blog are things like when we do medical training for people, we teach police officers to do blood sweeps looking for bullet wounds. And it's important when you do that, you have all your fingers close together because you're looking for a small bullet hole. And if your fingers are spread out, you can miss that, and you can miss something that's important and could result in the person dying. So when we do that in practice, we always tell them, hey, put your fingers together and do this. And then they kind of go through, and I call it notionalize that I'm looking for something, but you're not really, you're just trying to look good for the instructor. And that lasts for maybe the first time they do it. And then you see those gaps start to go. And then when you see scenarios being run, then it's this. And why is that? Well, it makes all the sense in the world that you would do that because it's more efficient in the scenario. If there's nothing to find,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. But if I do something like take a small coin or a washer and I tape it on the person underneath their clothes, and there's a consequence if you miss that, now there's something to find, and you see that behavior change immediately back to what is a good fundamental
Mm.
because the task environment requires it. And so often what we're doing in the tasks that we have people complete is they don't have to do the thing that we're telling them to do to be successful in that environment. And so they naturally drift away from it.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure in that environment that we have those perceptual cues that drive that behavior in the real environment. And that's one of the big problems with training this idealized or fundamental thing is that it's there. Now, have we seen that in research that pans out? So the most direct research that looked at this is in football with taking kids who are being trained to pass a qualification test that's used to screen kids for what level of football they're going to play. And that task involves very isolated things like dribbling through cones, passing a ball to a certain target, shooting, those sorts of things. And in the experiment, they took two groups of kids. One group got practice that focused on those specific things, meaning we practice dribbling around cones and passing the ball to targets. The other group played small-sided games. So they're playing football, but they're not playing a full match. They're playing on a smaller field with reduced numbers of players, and they're being given tasks to complete during those sessions that they're playing. But it's basically playing a smaller version of the game of football. And then they brought them back and they said, let's test them and see skills wise how they are using this basic skills test that involves the cones and the passing and that. And what they found is both groups did equally as well. Okay. So that's that idea of the fundamentals emerging out of the actual performance environment and coming down. Now, this particular study didn't do it, but I know there have been some others that have looked at it. So the group who played the small-sided games, not only did they develop the skills, the fundamentals that were being drilled at the other group, they also have game intelligence, right? They're
Yeah.
learning how to actually play the game and put these things together in motion while you're playing the game. In the firearms world, there are a couple studies that have come out, and I think it's OLMA is on
Yeah.
both of those studies. And when they looked at it, they originally did firearms training and they had two kinds of firearms training. One is your traditional kind of thing where you're just shooting at targets. I would call that marksmanship training. And the other one had a progressively more complicated course of fire that required shoot, don't shoot decisions. And they were looking at hit factor, which is how fast you shoot and how accurately you shoot to produce a score for both of those tasks. So they're trying to do both. The group who got the marksmanship training really focused on trying to optimize that speed accuracy trade-off as best they could. The group who got the other training that was progressively more complicated was focused on making correct decisions and shooting quickly and accurately. And then they tested them at the end, and they had two tests. One's kind of a shoot, don't shoot kind of test, and the other one is a traditional marksmanship, shoot at paper targets type test. And what they found is, as they kind of predicted, the group who got the scenarios did a little bit better on the scenarios, and the group who got the marksmanship did better on the marksmanship. But there was an unexpected finding that the group who got the scenarios also did better on the marksmanship. And they interpreted that as maybe a test retest effect, which it could be. it could be, and that we can't rule that out with the data that's there. But it's also consistent with this hypothesis that the very fact that you're doing something that looks like it, the fundamentals emerge from that thing that you're doing. And then so their explanation the first time was, well, this could be just that test retest, or maybe it's that they're so experienced in their marksmanship that they just get better naturally. Well, this next one they did that came out more recently was with people who are still in the academy. Now it's a longer academy than we do in the US. It's a multi-year thing that's
Yeah,
kind of drawn out, but um, in the academy, they found really the same results. And so what that shows you is that we're not focusing on doing the fundamentals, and yet those fundamentals are emerging from that.
yeah,
And that makes sense to me logically, and it's really interesting because this was they were not approaching it from an ecological dynamics point of view or that point of view. They were just looking at this, and when they originally found it, they said, "Huh, that's kind of weird." And when I saw it, I said, "Well, yeah, that's totally consistent with the argument that we're making, which is that those fundamentals developed in a task environment, and then now we're trying to take them out of the task environment and do it by themselves."
yeah, yeah. It's great. So, so the most simplified version of this is that also by spending a lot of time in game-based exercises, so to speak, you also develop fundamentals. It's not like if you do context-rich training that you get sloppy and
Yeah, if you design the task that so in such a way that it requires certain things for those outcomes to emerge, that will be there. And so it's also kind of a test of your fundamentals.
yeah,
If you find that it doesn't emerge in your task environment and you have a very representative task environment, perhaps the fundamentals off as well.
yeah, great. Show you a next question. It's about debriefing and self-reflection.
Yeah.
So I also work in emergency medicine with simulation training and
Hmm.
sometimes with the military, and there is a heavy emphasis upon not just experiencing the training and the simulation, but also about debriefing and self-reflection. And you can talk about a difference, but what I learned in those occupations, debriefing is more like a general, like a team thing. How did we do? And self-reflection is a part of it.
Hmm.
I also followed the model of Gary Klein for a long time, and I
Yeah.
recently talked with one of his, how do you say it? One of his
Colleagues,
colleagues,
students.
yeah, about how does it work. And by the way, very interesting. They also talk about because I asked them if good pattern recognition depends on successful training of success. Should we always train for success? And they replied no, because making mistakes lets you learn to see the difference.
Yeah.
That was also
Yeah.
like you said, but. What about debriefing and self-reflection in constant-led approach? Because if I can remember, but maybe I'm wrong, in one of his books, Rob Gray talks about Gary Klein and the national decision-making approach in the sense that it's maybe too cognitive or something like that. I'm not sure, but
Yeah. So
it's
this is
interesting.
this is the again where you get into one of those points about now we're having a theoretical argument about something that to me at the end of the day doesn't matter much to the practitioner.
Hmm.
I think debriefing is a valuable tool. I think sitting down and thinking about what you did, getting ideas from other people is one of the ways that you can pick out what seems to be working, what seems not to be working, can give you new areas to think about exploring when you engage in this type of situation again to look at. So I think it's there. I think again, you get into this idea about stored representations within ecological dynamics, and ecological dynamics doesn't like that. And there are other groups that do like those representations. And, does debriefing make sense if you don't have stored representations? Well, I think that they're both important,
Yeah,
right? And especially given that debriefing is a relatively low cost event to do,
yeah,
right? To take a few minutes at the end of training and say, let's go over and talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what do we want to do better next time. all those sorts of things. It doesn't cost you much. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, and it can be done, kind of right at the end of a training exercise to reinforce what you went through. I have no problem with that at all. And then on a self-reflective basis, it can be done even away from the training environment where you say, hey, I want you to go back and really kind of think through
Yeah.
what you do. And we certainly do that with our college students that we have do some training. We have them write reflective journals and things like that.
And do you use in police training, do you use a specific debriefing tool? Like in emergency medicine, we have a lot of very specific design models, but I'm not sure
Yeah.
in police training.
So we like to use going way back to the early andragogy literature with Schoen and the reflective practitioner, and he has the really it's a recollection. So what happened, reaction, how did you feel about it? I'm gonna forget the third R because you got me on the spot. But the third R is relevance, connecting it to other things that you've experienced.
Yeah.
And then the last one is responsibility, which is what are you going to do to get better at the things you need
Oh,
to get better at?
that's a
So
great
that's
tool.
those
Yeah.
are the four questions we ask them to do, and that's just a quick framework to think through. Usually, what we find with the students is you have to push them a little bit on the responsibility when they say, "Oh, I need to practice this more." And you're like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm going to practice this every day when I get home for 10 minutes or, whatever it is, a specific plan to do that." Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So last question, Pete, is about this research. I'm not sure if you already saw it. It is a dissertation by my friend Wendy Dorrestein.
I haven't.
She's she is now she was once she was the youngest chief of police here in the Netherlands in a district, and well, she did her PhD and is now a colonel in the military police, and she wrote a beautiful dissertation. So it's unique because she is an operator herself, and now she has a dissertation, and it's called Beyond the Split Second: Police and Military Training in Action. And her first thought was that we talk a lot about split second decisions in police and military, and in her experience, this resulted in well in getting people into split second decisions instead of investing in the pre-contact and so on.
Yeah.
So she did really an amazing research program. You can read it here. Over about 1900 police and military personnel were included here in the Netherlands. She observed with a team more than 1200 scenario-based training scenarios and observed real world observed incidents. And her goal was, does the training prepare for the uh, for the street?
Hmm.
And what she found was that in training, there was a mismatch between training and real life in the sense that in police training, there is a lot of emphasis on the split second. So people are shot, and so on. Well, in all those 400 and more real world observed incidents, there was a lot of more going on in the pre-contact cues, in communication, de-escalation, and so on. Okay, dus that well, and 3 points from her dissertation, which are relevant, I think, to this conversation, is that she talks about the importance of realistic problems and realistic solutions, and that seems to me fit very well with the constant-led approach of a representative design. She even uses that word.
Absolutely. And I'm going to assume the pre-contact phase is about the tactical decisions you're making when you're coming up on what's happening and
Yes.
what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is absolutely an area in US law enforcement that has been an issue of concern is that we have some of these very high profile shootings that police officers engage in that end up being lawfully justified because of what happened at that exact split second moment, as you're saying
Yeah.
in that split second. But there were a series of decisions that led into that if different decisions had been made, that situation could have been avoided in that. So we call those situations lawful but awful.
Yeah.
And that's the absolutely that idea is in the constraints-led approach, you might start very small at this one critical thing that happens at the end, but then you're expanding, you're expanding, you're expanding, and you're trying to introduce lots of variety in what's happening. And you're trying to create situations where there is a correct solution that if you do things well, you can avoid this turning into violence or that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And commenting on that and making sure that students understand that that's there and that all these decisions about keeping your time and distance and those sorts of things are critical. Do you have a link to that you can send me? I'd be very interested
Yes,
in.
it's in English, so that's the good thing about it. Yeah, I will send you the link. Yeah,
Perfect.
and
Perfect.
so I think she was also heavily influenced. In Germany, we have Mario Staller,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I think he was the first one many years ago who wrote a paper called "Developing Problem Solvers," and they
Yep.
already used constant that approach. And in her dissertation, she talks about realistic. I think she talks about representative problems, but sometimes that's difficult language. But
Sure.
also realistic solutions. And for example, here in the Netherlands, we have a lot of times, for example, sorry, this is because of my English, I have a little bit more.
No worries. No worries.
What we sometimes do is neglecting phase one, pre-contact. So you're in phase two. You're on the fire, so to speak.
Yeah.
Then you have to decide in a split second.
Yeah.
Uh, and, and to make it even more problematic, you cannot use, for example, how do you call it? Your
Radio.
communication, radio, and so on.
Radio. Yes.
So, and I have seen this in training that officers said to me, yeah, why am I in this situation? In real life, I don't put my car in front of the house, for example.
Yep.
And
Yep.
on the solution part, yeah, I want to contact my colleagues. Yeah, you cannot do because we have no radio. So
Yeah.
this is not to make training look bad. Eh? This is sometimes the constraints of the training.
Yeah.
So realistic solutions and realistic, and I think it fits very well in the yeah,
Yeah. It makes sense to me.
yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah, and yeah. Also, she developed the model of the three phases and also using them as much as possible. So give the officers the opportunity to make a plan. How you can also do it short, but
Sure.
priming them for yeah,
Yeah. And that's the Rob talks about that talk aloud protocol, right? That
hmm
you can, when you go through scenarios with trainees, you can actually, I want you to narrate
yeah,
what you're thinking as we're doing this, right? So
yeah,
tell me what you're thinking. Okay, why are you choosing to walk over here? Why are you all those sorts of things so that you're doing that. That's I think very useful too because it helps make them very deliberate about
yeah,
what they're trying to do as opposed to just charging into whatever situation.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think I've also made that mistake many times where I just asked people to do risky things, so to speak. Then I said, "You step in the car, drive towards the house, and you will see what happens." And then
yeah.
they say, "No, I don't want to."
Why would I ever do
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's yeah, that's a bit yeah. What about one more question? What about procedures? I'm not sure if this is a correct word, but for example, when I work with the SWAT teams, they had a lot of procedures, like how to,
Yeah.
with 8 men, how to walk into the building and so on. It
Yeah. So when you have a group that works together and trains together all the time, you can develop some pretty solid procedures about how you approach certain problems because you can practice those and you can drill those to the same way. What I would say though, from seeing high level tactical and SWAT teams operate is yes, they have the groundwork, they have some, I would call them concepts and principles that are in
yeah,
play about how they're going to approach the situation. But if you were to ask an incident commander or the team commander, for example, okay, I'm going to give you a layout of the house. I'm going to put people in the house where they're going to be encountered for your people as they go through. and I want you to tell me where all your people end. And they'll be like, I can't do that.
Mm.
And you say, why? And they say, well, because they're making reads in the situation about what they need to do, and then everybody else is reacting to those reads
Yeah,
so that they're solving the problems that are put before them. And
yeah,
so they're trusting that individual SWAT operator to see and understand what's occurring, to take appropriate action to solve that problem, and the rest of the team to take the appropriate actions based upon what they've seen this other person do. And so what they're really doing is, yes, those procedures help to push you in a certain direction and allow you to work together, but they're not constraints that are so tight that
yeah.
there's only one solution to this problem.
You
It
can also
is
use the CLA approach in team context, like giving them a
absolutely,
task and a desired outcome. Okay,
absolutely.
yeah. Very short, fun questions. The first one is, what is one of the coolest research papers that came out and you posted on your blog recently?
Well, actually, the one that I need to dig out that I haven't posted on the blog yet is about positional asphyxiation,
Hmm.
which isn't really an EcoD thing, but it's an important thing in the United States about how we do subject control and that. And I actually ran into that through Chris Butler's bullpen blog. So that's one there. You know, we have another piece that's going to come out in a few weeks that's about police officer mortality, how police officers die,
Hmm.
looking at those things, and that's from a large data set here in the United States that we keep on occupational mortality and talks about, for our officers, it's heart disease and cancer are two of the biggest killers that are there. So certainly those are there. Those would be the two big ones I would say
Yeah.
that I'm looking forward to putting together.
Best books to study.
As many as you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's
Yeah.
I really, if you're interested in ecological dynamics, I really like Rob's books as a
Yeah.
gentle entry point. There's the constraints-led approach by Renshaw, and that's another good place to enter into the field there.
Yeah.
But I would say the other thing is, I find, again, useful theories are things that give you ideas about directions you can go to improve your training. And I don't want people to feel handcuffed to say, well, I do ecological dynamics, therefore I would never do this. Well, it's no. Ecological dynamics has some strengths in some areas. It's got some unanswered questions. There are some debates about these things. And so good coaching, good training is going to require that you be flexible and adaptable with how you're approaching your students and how you
Yeah.
approach the problems you're trying to solve.
You also talked about John Verkijk, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Vervaeke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have seen many podcasts with him, but does he also have a book?
He does. His book is a deeper philosophy one that's off of his lectures that he did during 2020 and
Oh, yeah.
COVID. So the book is Awakening from the Meaning
Oh,
Crisis.
yeah, that's true. Yeah. And you like his work, you mentioned it.
I
You,
do. I think he's doing some very interesting things, and I think I see him pulling together some pieces that are really interesting pieces
yeah.
philosophically. Yeah.
And the last question, what are very inspiring podcasts to listen to as
I
trainers,
I
but
I
whatever?
really like the Trainer's Bullpen.
Yeah.
That's a good one. He's got good people that are on there. Um, I listen to it's so broad. I listen to econ talk all the time, which is not really training
Oh,
related, but
okay.
sometimes I find interesting ideas and
Yeah.
interesting and that kind of thing. And he doesn't talk about economics as much as the title would suggest.
Ah,
So it's a lot of different things in life. So I would say those are two big ones that I look at.
you also watch or listen to Huberman Lab? Huberman Lab? Huberman?
Huberman?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
He's interesting. He tends to be a little too long for me a lot of times.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah, I recently really enjoyed Sean Ryan.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I haven't listened to him a lot, but I have a lot of friends who do.
yeah,
So
well, it's beautiful, but it's 3 hours, man. It's so,
yeah,
but he has some
yeah,
amazing guests with all, like, okay.
yeah. That's what I like is podcasts give an overview of somebody who's doing something interesting and then points me to a book. I can go
Yeah,
pick up the book and get a
yeah.
deeper dive into it. Yeah.
Did I forget to ask you something?
No, I think we're good. I think
Great.
we're good.
Well, thank you so much for talking about your work and about the constant that approach. And use this material also in my talk to the Police Academy next week.
Great.
So thank you so much.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I will say goodbye to the listeners and talk to you afterwards. Have a good day. Bye bye.